Kia ora. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. This is the meeting for the Engaging Researchers with Data Interests Group, and we've called it Researchers Engagement with Data Management from Cookbook to Toolkit. You're all very welcome, and as noted in the notes, this is a working meeting, so you've come here of your own free will. And the second half of the session will very much involve you giving input. So look forward to that. My name is James Savage, and I'm currently based at Te Pukenga, the New Zealand Institute of Skills and Technology. So meeting agenda very quickly. There's a QR code there for the collaborative session notes. Those are also available through the program. Please do find those if you've got access to screen, phone or laptop that you can access, and we will be asking for some input, and there's also links and things via the collaborative notes that you can make use of, so please do find that. In terms of the agenda, 5 minutes of quick welcome and housekeeping and greetings to you all, a little bit of information about our current activities, so previous collections of case studies that we've done, then a little session around our informative RDM podcast that will be presented by Shannon over to my left, and then very briefly about progress with our little toolkit for online engagement. We're then going to have a working meeting, and this is going to involve some further case study collection, ideally, or at least starting that from you guys in the room. Those of you not able to fill in forms or contribute via laptops or anything like that, we'll have some little small group facilitations, discussions around engaging researchers with data, talking about your own initiatives, sharing some best practice, things like that. And then finally, a bit of a discussion around group priorities and deliverable strategy. So this group has been, was active very much a few years ago. It's been a little bit more fallow in the last couple of years, various issues with co-chair turnover, as always happens, and of course that little thing called COVID that we like to not mention anymore, caused some disruptions, but we are looking to get back into a clear direction for the group, and we really need your guys' input into that to make sure we're heading in the right direction and putting what resources we do have into the correct outcomes and deliverables. So really looking forward to your input on that. Great. Some closing remarks at the end. So just very briefly, I always like it when these meetings start by the group actually explaining what the group's about, so everyone's clear and on the same page about what we're talking about. Historically, we found that RDM discussions were often limited to librarians, data professionals, and those that are already kind of in the sphere, the ones that are already doing best practice because they're interested in searching for the best practice and doing it. But we want engagement from everyone doing research, everyone who produces and reuses data, if we want to implement good practice in RDM across all the communities. So the point of this group is to collect and share best practice on how to engage researchers about research data. So how we get that engagement, how we connect those people who are the experts to the ones that are less expert users of data and researchers, and help organizations increase engagement with their research communities. That's the core directive of the group. We have various co-chairs, myself, who's presenting, Connie, Ava, Raman, Andrea, Ellie, Shannon, all here, I believe. Brianna is not here, or is also involved in the podcast. The co-chairs that are in the room, hands up, please, guys. Great. We'll be helping with some facilitation in the working meeting later on in the session. Connie, you're excused from that because I didn't manage to tell you that was happening. All good. We're also looking for more co-chairs. We're always interested in representation from other institutions, different parts of the world, and we just like having a good set of co-chairs. Not everyone needs to join every meeting. We're also obviously just looking for general membership of the group, of the RDA interest group, and you can join the interest group via the link in the collaborative notes, and please do contact us if you're interested in joining the group as a co-chair. Yes, question? The collaborative notes through the program.
The Google Doc. I get no edit access. I can't write in it. Am I the only person who has this problem? So somebody needs to open them up.
Okie doke. Do we know, Shannon, can you have a chase up on that?
Yes, I'm opening it up and I'm going to see if I have. It says anybody with the link can edit. Someone said that clicking through the link through the program works fine to edit.
For me, I had to request actually edit access.
Huh.
So we've got a mixture of people who can access.
Do you know, James, do you know what I think the problem might be? I think some people are going to the RDA ones versus the ones that our collaborative doc. So do we want them on the one that we had or on the RDA one?
Well, the RDA one should have.
Okay, then I will. Do you want me to move the content over? I think that's the problem, is there's nothing there yet.
No. Yeah, that's where it should be. Yeah.
Okay, and that one should have edit access.
And everyone should have edit access to that. Yes, everyone should have edit, because that's in the it's managed by the RDA, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, it's not in our group Google Drive. It's in the RDA one, so it should be open to access. So apologies if that's not working for people. Yeah, but do make sure you're going to the shared collaborative notes that are via the Google Drive, via the RDA program link, or via the QR code, not any other one you might have had with the group.
The QR code one makes it program one isn't. QR code doesn't.
Okay.
James, I moved the stuff over, so let's just an executive decision. Please use the one through the agenda.
Yeah.
And which people are already doing, and that one everybody should have edit access to. And apologies for the confusion.
Yeah. Sorry for that. Not quite sure how that happened. Cool. And thanks for bringing that to our attention early on. So quick bit about our case studies. We produced an output actually before formalization of the interest group, a book called Engaging Researchers with Data, the cookbook. This was a collection of 24 case studies about engaging the research community with research data management. It was a formal RDA output. It's now been downloaded over 7,000 times, which is pretty crazy. That's direct downloads from open book publishers, many more views online, things like that. Been translated to Turkish, no other translations thus far. The data collection for that kicked off at International Data Week 2018 in Botswana and was facilitated by the Libraries for Research Data Interest Group. This interest group was really a bud off of that and the project to create the cookbook. So started data collection after that, and the cookbook was written in the following year and a bit. We found the case studies are increasingly valuable when there's more diversity of them, because that gives more of a smorgasbord for institutions to choose from when they want to find an initiative to use to engage their researchers with data. Here's a little table of ones from the cookbook. We divided up into various categories and classified them by the number of researchers involved, target audience, ease of implementation, number of FTEs in research data management in the institution to give an idea of how many resources are required, things like that. All that information is in the cookbook, but we want to build on it. And now, so 5 years on from Botswana, we want to make a new push for case study data collection, and we want your case studies. Those of you in the room, you will know someone or have initiatives that you know of in your own institutions that you can contribute, and we want to hear about them. And we've created a template form for standardized collection. That is also should be available through the shared drive. That's not editable because that's our template. So you need to download it, then fill it in and send it back, which the instructions are on the form. We want practical activities from people, and we want as much information as you can supply that will help others use your activity in their own contexts and institutions. So diverse studies are appreciated. Things like a RDM related quiz, good for an icebreaker, hands-on RDM activity can be used during a training session, engagement events targeting particular under-engaged groups, anything you can think of about managing or improving sort of capacity building or engagement with research data management. We want those examples from you so we can share them with the community generally, and ideally in some standardized formats, and categorize them in such a way that people can pick up and find them and use them in their own contexts. Just to clarify what we don't want generic documentation about effective research data management, or like a full details about an entire large support program. So don't submit a case study that is, here is a full description of exactly how my data steward program works at my institution, and all the bells and whistles and all the management structures and all that kind of stuff like that. That's too broad a scope to be useful for a new institution, I think, and too large amount of content. But activities that would create, build, reinvigorate those particular support programs, certain subsets of them, absolutely useful. Generic advice about teaching research data management, including teaching it online. That's probably a little bit too general to be useful at this stage. There are resources around that online, various places. So case studies would ideally be domain or context specific. And we would prefer case studies that are modular or standalone to help all institutions build on their current RDM activities. So yeah, again, this is kind of tied into what I said before about not particularly wanting just a description of your whole data steward program, because that's very hard to implement from scratch. We want this to be more valuable to those institutions that don't currently have much provision and are looking for easy wins or things they can then build into a more coherent framework down the line. So modular stuff would be better. So that's a little overview of our case study data collection thus far, and advance warning about what's likely to happen in the working meeting going forward. And I'm now going to pass over to Shannon to talk about the podcast. Shannon, you can go over. No, you can come over. Yeah, come. Yeah.
Thanks for relegating the podium. Okay, so hello, everybody. Welcome. As James said, my name is Shannon Sheridan. I'm a research data librarian at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I'm here today on behalf of all of the co-chairs, plus my co-host, Brianna Ezra-Wham at Penn State University Libraries, who couldn't be with us today, to talk to you about the podcast that came out of this interest group that we've been using to engage the data professional community. So if you're interested in this group, and as you can see from the work that we're doing, we believe that engaging with researchers is a really key component of promoting good data management practices. And successful engagement activities have a really high potential for wider reaching impact if they can be replicated at and adapted at other institutions. However, we've noticed that there's a couple hurdles to this kind of adoption. The first is that data professionals, and obviously this varies institution to institution, country to country, but frequently they're not always publishing full-length articles about the smaller kinds of engagement activities that they're doing, and other types of engagement initiatives that they're undertaking. And even when they do, we're all busy. We don't always have time to stay up to date on what the most current literature is, finding all of those little conference presentations or lightning talks where people talk about the practical day-to-day things that they're doing with their researchers. And so the RDA podcast was born as an easily digestible way to share that kind of information outside of the strict constraints of papers and presentations. So RDA, which is an acronym and stands for Improving Data Engagement and Advocacy, grew out of this interest group when we were thinking about new ways that we could share this kind of information with our professional community. So there's two types of episodes on the show. In some of the episodes, we feature interviews with data professionals who are engaging with their researchers in new or novel ways, finding space to highlight the work that we find. We also spend time reviewing new literature, so those instances where things do get a full write-up, to highlight impressive work that's already happening in a way that hopefully makes the listeners not have to read the entire article themselves, but also lets them know when there's something really cool or applicable that they might want to dive further into. So our episodes are released once a month, and we alternate between the interviews and the and the publication reviews. Our first season was a bit long because we started in the spring and ended up just doing basically a full calendar year. But we took the summer off and we just launched the start of our second season. We try to get our episodes down to 20 to 30 minutes so that it's easily digestible for our audience. And our target audience are people like you. So I'm going to go through a little bit about the process of how we created the podcast and what episode creation looks like. So before we could start recording our first podcast, we did do a lot of research. The first thing we did was look at other data podcasts and other podcasts that had similar academic themes, but maybe were not specifically data related, to see what sort of content did well, what sort of content we personally liked as listeners, and get some inspiration and also make sure that somebody else wasn't already doing this. Fortunately, we did not find anybody else who was doing exactly what we wanted to do, so we went full steam ahead. There were also a lot of decisions to make up front, like the name of our show, deciding on our target audience, and how frequently we would publish, and the general structure of what our episodes would look like. It took us a lot longer than I'm proud of to settle on the title. There was a lot of back and forth, but we got there and we decided on our frequency of once a month. And honestly, that was mostly determined just by how much free time Brianna and I had and wanting to make sure we were still regularly putting out new content. There was a little bit of research involved to decide on the publishing platform. Basically, we needed something free because we didn't have neither of us had funding to do this from our home institutions, and we didn't want ads on our shows. So we went with Anchor from Spotify as our platform. You can syndicate out to a lot of different streaming services that way. And if you don't turn on like the ad revenues, then from what I've heard, there's no ads on the show. And that way we could also syndicate out to other places like Google or Apple Podcasts to try to cast as wide a net for an audience as possible. All of this setup took us a couple of months before we could actually start thinking about our first interviews and recording our first episodes. So as I said, we've got two episode types. We identify interviewees for our podcast in a variety of ways. Sometimes they're recommended to us by colleagues. Sometimes we see interesting talks at conferences or posters that might just be short snippets and we want to hear more and get more in depth about that engagement. And sometimes we just encounter the work in random venues and we're like, this seems like something that would be fun to share with our community. Basically, we try to target data practitioners who are doing interesting work, but like I said, might not have formal publications or might have publications that might not have a broader audience to highlight in those interviews. Personally, I don't think it takes a lot to be interviewed by us. We try to make it as easy as possible for our guests. Our scheduling interview blocks are about an hour long. Since we do edit down to like 20 to 30 minutes, we find that normally gets us enough content and isn't an undue burden on those that we are interviewing. We do send them a brief survey that gets us their biographical details, if they want to share their social media handles, their bio information, and that helps us write the show notes when we're getting ready to publish. We also try to provide really thorough documentation before the interview, because for a lot, if not most of our guests, it's been their first time being interviewed on a podcast. So we try to do a lot of work up front to make them as comfortable as possible. So we'd like to prepare them with our what to expect document. I think that's literally the title. And that sort of runs them through the things like the questions we'll ask, the timeline, and what the recording process is like. Then we do the recording. We have a few set of questions that we ask all of our interviewees just to make sure that we're kind of getting relevant information up front for our listeners. But we also make sure to leave space and time for us and our guests to go off on tangents because sometimes we find those the most interesting parts of the episode. Sometimes they make editing a little bit tricky because we have to fit it all in, but it's good because that just means there's a lot of good content to get in there. The conversations are always fun, and we really appreciate when people come on to talk to us about their projects, because it's great not just to be able to share it, but also just for us to hear what's going on out in the world. So articles are identified on much more of an ad hoc basis. Generally, we look for current articles that highlight researcher engagement, but that's really where our requirements end. I know once we did an episode on a new set of, I think it was guidelines, so it wasn't a traditional publication, but something we thought that would be useful for our community to hear about. Generally, Brianna and I will both read the article, and then we will co-write a synopsis and also choose a few highlights as well. We try to give a good summary so our listeners don't have to go out and read the whole article, but we also give some opinions and interpretations, and we always link to the citation so that if people are interested, they can easily access the full article. For technology, we use Zoom and just use the audio file there for the actual recording. And neither of us, I will say, have bought podcast-specific microphones. But if you've ever listened to the podcast or go forward and listen and think we need them, let us know. But it seems to be working so far. There we go. So once the audio is recorded, it's time for editing. Again, because we're cheap, we didn't want to have to pay for a program. And Audacity was one of the few free audio editing programs that were out there. Both Brianna and I have downloaded the program, but since it is just a local program, we can't actually co-edit the file, which on one hand makes it tricky, but probably also makes it easier to not have two people editing audio at the same time. So we generally take turns editing the different episodes, where one of us will take the first pass, and then the second one will go through for the second listen and do a final review. In general, we spend no more than 3 to 4 hours editing an episode, but this is very much an average and can vary wildly. We find that after our first year, once we got some episodes under our belts, that we can do the article episodes fairly quickly because since we're controlling all of the content, we find it easier to mediate how much time we're talking, and we know what parts we have to edit out. And so those tend to be pretty shorter. It's really more just getting out the random ums and our random diatribes that we go off and just kind of talk. The interviews tend to take longer to edit just because we've got more people talking, more content that we have to figure out what stays and what goes, all while maintaining all of the important content and a nice natural flow of conversation. While the episode is being edited, we also collate the show notes. These generally aren't long or complicated. If it's an interview, we will include that biographic information that our interviewees gave us, as well as any relevant links mentioned. And if we mention any other resources during the episode, we will link to those as well. Then we are ready to publish. So like I said earlier, we actually just launched season 2 of the show. We published the last episode of season 1 in May, late May, and then took the summer off. As I said, season 1 was actually quite long. We had 11 episodes, nearly a full year. But going forward, just to maintain our sanity and make sure we're on a more regular schedule, we're going to be sticking to a more academic calendar where we'll be going mostly October through June. But that does mean that we do have right now a full year of metrics to look back on for the working group. And so when I made these slides, and this was a week or 2 ago, we had 513 total listens, which we were really excited about. We weren't quite sure if anybody was going to want to download a podcast about, data management and engagement, but people did. So that graph shows month by month, and then also a little bit of a breakdown of our audience. So we do have a little bit of an international audience. Right now, most of our listeners are from the US. I think this is a combination of the fact that Brianna and I are both US based, and a solid portion of our guests from the first season were US based as well. Not all of them, but quite a chunk. However, as we go forward, we'd really like to start incorporating more international examples this season. So we're actively looking for interviewees who are willing to talk to us about their projects. So that can give us a more geographic coverage of content and perhaps also a bigger geographic spread of listeners. I know there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in other places. And I think the international borders, sometimes it's hard to hear about things going on in your own country, let alone what's going on in other places. So it's really nice to hear those stories from elsewhere and in different institutional settings. I think there's a lot of value in that. So I will leave this up here for a second. But if you're interested, like I said, the first episode just dropped. Plus, there's a whole back catalog of our first season. If you don't get your fill of talking about data this week, here's your trip home. We'll keep you entertained. They're 20 to 30 minutes. So we tried to keep them where it's like, you know, maybe a commute length or something.
Yeah, we can do questions about podcasts now. I think that makes sense.
Yes, because this is, and I'll leave that up. And then I think before, hold on, I'm going to go forward one just to do the thank you, and then we'll do questions. Because I want to thank you all for listening to the presentation, but also this is my big chance to pitch to more of an international audience. If you are interested in being on the podcast to talk about an engagement project that you are working on, scope-wise, very similar to what James talked about for the case studies, please reach out to me. We'd be very happy to hear about what you're working on. And also, if you just have any like thoughts or questions about the show, you can also reach out. We're happy to answer any of them. But then I will switch back, and we've got some time if anybody has any questions about the podcast. And I will remind, so that people online can hear, if you have a question, please utilize one of the mics that we've got up in the middle of the aisle. So the question was, is it only on Spotify? And no, it's syndicated out to places like Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. I think we got most of the major podcast sources. So this particular QR code will take you to Spotify. And I think there's links where you can get to the other services. Yes.
Maybe you can repeat my question.
Is it a short question? Okay.
It's not exciting. Is there any investment from the hardware? Like,
Mm.
do your people you interview, do they use their, I don't know, phone mic, laptop mic? Thanks for the great talk. I had a question concerning hardware. You talked a little bit about software, so I was wondering, I mean, if you just have an episode where you two talk, like, did you buy a special mic for that, for example, you and your colleague, or, and then if you invite someone over, how do you deal with like different voice recording qualities, hardware issues, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer is no to all of that. We did not invest in any special equipment because we just didn't have the funds to do so. And when we have guests on the podcast, also low barrier of entry, and so we can get a good spread of people, all of those interviews are done remotely, and it's really just whatever people bring. I think the one benefit to doing this post-COVID-19 is that people have maybe slightly better microphone setups than they would have in the past. And because we are no budget, as opposed to even low budget, we really can't control that much for differing audio qualities, which I know if you listen in some of the episodes, you sometimes will be able to tell. If people are quiet, we can do a little bit of tweaking in the editing software to make sure that people can actually be heard. But that's about the extent of it. So yeah, good question. Others?
Thank you for the talk. I'm Wolfgang from Salzburg Research. I have a question and a comment. First, the comment, I guess. There are a lot of AI tools that help you edit the podcast, like removing the ums and ums automatically, and also cutting out long silences. So you might want to Google AI podcast editing. So there is a lot of support software, also with Audacity plugins. So it might make your editing time even shorter. The other thing I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned that the guest has to be comfortable And I'm planning to do a podcast with Austrian researchers, and some of them don't really like to come out of their shell initially. So I was wondering if you could get into a bit more detail on how to engage people and make them bring them to a level that they are comfortably speaking about their work and themselves.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So there's a couple of things that we do. The first is to send them that document so that they have a general idea of what to expect. And I don't have a link for it, but at some point I can perhaps put it in the collaborative notes so that people can see what that looks like. And so programmatically, they know what to expect when they get on a call with us. We always provide those general questions beforehand so that they know what to expect. I've had that happen in just like job interviews, other types of interviews, so that they don't feel put on the spot and have to come up with a really clever response in the moment. And so I think we found that providing those in advance lets them think a little bit more deeply about what they want to say, how they want to say it. And then also when we start the meeting, we turn the recording on right away. We let them know that we're going to do it. But the nice thing is the recording is on while we're doing the introductions, the banter, so that it's not like 5 minutes of chit chat and then suddenly we're recording. So we try to make that transition a little less abrupt. We always leave our cameras on, and I think all of our guests have left their cameras on, which really helps with, seeing their faces so you can react to facial expressions. And I think just being inquisitive and asking, which I'm sure if you're planning on doing the interviews, and I'm sure if a lot of you work with researchers, but actually being interested in asking questions as they come up. People I've noticed tend to get more, I want to say relaxed, but when we start going off on the tangents, because now we're like actually really interested, and this isn't a formulaic question that we've laid out beforehand. It's like, ooh, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So those are a couple of the techniques that we use, and some of the tricks, I guess, if you want to call them that. I'll be honest, we haven't done like any post-interview surveys to know if they work, but people tend to still be smiling by the end of the interviews. So we think it's working okay.
Thank you for the talk. Had a slightly provocative question, which also goes to the whole interest group, which is why I've never heard of it before.
Well, because we only have an audience of 500 and no funding for advertising. But I mean, that's a valid question. It's very grassroots. So a lot of the advertising has been through social media, the people that we interview. I don't think we've ever sat down to talk about like an advertising strategy and getting it out there. And maybe that's something going forward we can be more aggressive about in terms of putting it on our page or something, but I don't know if anybody else has anything to add. But plus it's new. To be honest, when we started, we weren't sure how it was going to be received. So that's part of it too, I think.
I would also say that it was discussed at the 2 plenaries ago, I would say.
Mhm.
And then the last plenary, we had a joint meeting, and it wasn't really talked about then because it was a joint session. So yeah, a year ago, people might have heard about it at one of these meetings, but since then, yeah, we wouldn't have done even through the RDA links.
But hey, spread the word. Tell your friends. Ah.
Hi, I'm Tanya from Surf in the Netherlands. Thanks so much. I think it's so cool that you made a podcast. Thanks for your AI tips. That's really cool.
Yeah.
This is actually not a question, but an answer to the guy asking about hardware. The Yeti microphone is a really good and easy microphone. It is about €100, but it's just plug it into your computer. It has a couple of settings and it picks up sound really well. So
Nice.
that's all.
I like all of the tips that I am getting from this session as well. So thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if there's some community engagement after you publish the podcast. Like, is there a comment section? Do you kind of navigate through that, or is it just like the podcast and that's it?
There is a comment section. Nobody's left a comment yet. So. But if people want to engage, we're here for it. So, but yeah, we do have like contact information on there, but there really hasn't been a lot of people getting back in touch. Generally, it's where we see it is people reposting it like on their Twitter and tagging us, generally when they're either interviewees or they like know people that have been interviewed. So.
Yes, and hello, I'm Carl Benedict from the University of New Mexico, and I can vouch for their success in making it a pretty darn user-friendly process, as my colleague and I participated in one of the early season 1 podcasts, and it was well organized and productive. So if you want to contribute, I can vouch for the ease. And I'll also attest to, yes, the importance of a good microphone, as that's the first thing many people judge you by, regardless of your content.
I know. Thank you for the endorsement, Carl. I saw you back there, but I didn't want to call you out and be like, hey, past guest on here. And yeah, and the hard thing too with the microphones is even if Brianna and I had good microphones, we don't have the capability to ensure that like all of our guests do. So, you know, one of the nice side effects is if we're all going to be a little uneven, at least we're all uneven and on the same playing field. But that's just one of the limitations of doing a podcast on this scale, is being, you know, stuck with those technical limitations. So. Okay. I think that's good, and we're ready to move on to the next section.
Thank you very much, Shannon. So just very quickly, I wanted to talk about an initiative that we started in the sort of between finishing off all the follow-ups with the cookbook and now, which was an intended sort of toolkit for dissemination of online engagement activities that had been collected. So this was originally begun during COVID and was aiming to make a collection of online engagement activities that can be reused and adapted and shared online. The idea was to have a Zenodo collection or something like that. In the end, we received very few case studies around that. Potentially people had other things going on during COVID, which is not entirely surprising. So that's one of the reasons why we sort of are now going for a bigger push now. Things have relaxed a little bit. And also, of course, with the relaxing of COVID restrictions, the value of a dedicated online engagement collection has now receded a bit. So that's really all I wanted to say. We have some case studies from that process, but we're going to roll them into whatever we are doing next. And that's what we need support with. So this working meeting coming up, next section is going to be, well, talk about collecting case studies in the next little bit, and then finally a little bit of a discussion on how we refocus the group and what you guys think is a good options for future outputs and dissemination strategies. So hopefully everyone's managed to get into the correct version of the collaborative links. I suspect that was my fault, and I suspect I copied the wrong Google Docs link over and one of the QR codes. So thanks for everyone for sorting that and finding the right links. Any more issues, post in chat on Teams and you can be directed to the correct link, or follow the collaborative notes link from the RDA page. Cool. So now we're moving on to the working meeting section of the meeting. And this is what we want to do, given that we've all got you here in a room together. We want to start making some progress on further case study collection. If you're in this room, you probably have a case study to contribute or know of one from your institution. So what we'd like you to do for this next part of the meeting is do one or more of the following. So put your name and contact details in the session notes. If you have a title of a case study that you're involved with or know about, put that in those collaborative notes as well, so that we know to follow up with you and what that case study is about. That's the minimum thing that we'd like you to do. If you have a laptop and you are willing to start putting in something, there is the case study template that is accessible through the shared collaborative notes. You could start filling that in. You could start filling in the case study Google form link, which is also in the collaborative notes. That will take you to a Google form. It's exactly the same as the template, but if you prefer to fill in a form rather than fill in a template and then send it to us, then that would be absolutely fine as well. If you don't have the ability or the willingness or don't have an example to provide, then we would like you to break into small groups, 3 or 4-ish probably works well, and discuss and share some best practice of RDM engagement activities in your institution. So find someone from a different institution, don't just go with your little parochial groups, and share what you guys are doing with your engagement activities. And let's make those links now and get that stuff shared. If you don't have an example or you're really looking for some examples of what bigger institutions are doing, then if you're a small institution, find a group at a bigger institution that's more mature and start talking to them. We also have our co-chairs, and they will be roaming around facilitating. They will be answering any questions on the template that you might have, and also just sort of helping facilitate those group discussions, probing you with some questions maybe. We'll see how it goes. We're also interested in any feedback you have on the templates and how it could be improved. This is sort of version 2 of the template, and we think it contains enough questions and has enough detailed content that people can fill it in, and we can get a lot of useful stuff out of it. But there are probably still some kinks that could be worked out. And if we're sharing this to a wider audience outside of this room, then we're grateful for any further feedback you might have on the template. So at risk of messing up links again, there are another 2 links if you're not accessing the Google, you're not accessing it through the shared meeting notes. There is a link to the Google Docs template and a link to the forms there. If there is an issue with having 2 QR codes up at the same time, I did it so we can do both of them. So tell me which one you want if you're having issues with accessing them with both of them up there. And yeah, it's just heading up to 12:14 now. So yeah, let's have sort of 15, 20 minutes or so on just working on some case studies.
Because don't forget, we're going to be discussing, is that on? We're going to be discussing then future directions of the group after. So even if you don't want to necessarily do a case study, that's also that discussion to look forward to. Yeah,
fantastic. I'm also happy to take any questions if there were any questions about the cookbook or anything like that. Then happy to take questions on that, seeing as though obviously the facilitating sort of small group in the room won't be recorded. Yeah, that's all good. Yes. So you can follow the link to the cookbook that's in the shared notes or in the presentation, which is also shared on there. That has the list of all the 24 studies that are already on there. And we have, Raman, Ava, Andrea, Shannon floating around. If you are not filling in something or providing feedback or doing anything like that, then maybe stick your hand up and then form yourself into some little groups and start discussions about engagement.
Hi. Yes, yeah. I am Shannon. That's okay. No, you're fine. A lot of names to keep track of. We just have so many characters. So email would be best. It's Shannon.Sheridan at PNNL. Yeah. .gov. Yeah. Where do you? Oh, okay. Oh. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Oh, well, thanks for getting in touch. Cool. I don't think there's that many. Not yet. I think for the next part, let's see how many people there are. There's only 22 people, so I think probably for the next one, maybe just split up into two. Like you put 10 people, maybe. Wait. not like, right. No, because it's not like, oh, no, I don't think they do. So I think people give us kind of have it thought of. Right, like it's right. Every time they think we do it, but we always. But it's like it's always in our head, even if it's hard. It is like that's where it's out. Yeah, it's not in a technical sense, but like it started. So that's my problem. But whenever we talk about it, we are and I mean, yeah, no, I would be totally, yeah, like I would definitely at an age to like make it more obvious for the party. But wait, I made. Yeah. I probably always say that. No, and right, it's like literally very word of mouth, very. I think we gave a short little like on it. Our job is like data. But like other than you know, we're doing it with so many other things. Not that you need an advertisement, but I don't have that. Right. So it's not like we're done, like I'm doing it. I think we kind of talked like just started. Yeah, so you know, all of the articles are pretty standard. Yeah. And I think we even thought about looking at physical books, but our idea was like books are so and they were yeah. Yeah, very good. But oh, they're talking, standing up there, like, oh, it's all good. For those people who do it, there's like 20 people, so yeah. And then maybe like and that would be like
Okay, hopefully some good discussion there in the room about research data management engagement strategies. And thank you to those who have been filling in some case studies, either via the template or via the form. If you've got part the way through, then absolutely fine for you to complete it later. Send those completed forms to me or finish the Google form. You should be able to go back out and then go back into the Google Forms as you like. So the final part of the meeting was another sort of working meeting section. And this is about group priorities and deliverable strategy. Ultimately, we've not had a strong vision about where we want to go with the interest group, other than completing the podcast and generally collecting some more case studies for the last little bit. So we really want input from the community over what we should be prioritizing in terms of activities for this group, how we should be doing it, where the resources need to go. So some questions for the room. So there's a Google Forms there, which hopefully the QR code works. And you can also follow the link. The link is also in the shared documents. That's going to ask you some just 3 very simple questions on priorities, whether we should follow the cookbook, whether we're still aligned with the charter, and if you have any other quick suggestions. But I also wanted to have this discussion in terms of questions to the room and discussion in the room. So involving any of our co-chairs that want to be involved, and also all of our attendees here. So essentially a couple of questions for everyone that we really want input on. We want to follow up on the cookbook because it was a well regarded piece of work, useful output. We've had lots of positive feedback on that. The question is, how should we follow up on it? Should we create a second edition of it? Should we create an online collection of individual case studies that can be used sort of independently? And do we want to follow up on the 24 case studies that were included in the cookbook? This is now a sort of 5 years down the line. Do we want to follow up on those specific studies and find out what happened to them? If there are any more lessons learned after 5 years, if they've not been used anymore, why is that? And questions like that. So questions from the attendees. And we have roaming mics with the co-chairs, and also just generally any other sort of comments or questions. At the front here, Roman.
I mean, I'll ask the same question as before. I think what we did at the time was really good, but it's a niche of people who know about it. So I've been to very different RDM events, and the question is always coming, how do we engage researchers? And people don't know about the cookbooks, they don't know about the podcast.
Of course, at least 7,000 people know about the cookbook.
I think it will be worth thinking about how to get this information out on a larger scale, having a marketing strategy or something like this, and maybe also stop doing no budget project, but look for budget first.
Sure. So in terms of, leave that mic there. So in terms of networks, what are other networks that we could disseminate? So we can disseminate through RDA easily through the group, and anyone who joins the group through the RDA site can then pass it on through their networks. What other networks could we potentially tap into that the cookbook and related outputs could be shared through?
You mentioned disseminated to researchers. Was that?
No.
Oh, okay. But we can do that, yes, through RDA. We can do that through our organization and the synergies that we have with other organizations, through other projects that we might have been involved. So it's up to us at the end also to make sure to share this resource if we think that it's useful to others, of course. I mean,
yeah. So we've got grassroots, which is anyone who's in this room or connected to the RDA through their local institutions. We've got the RDA, other networks that could be useful for dissemination. Any suggestions? Question?
I have a question. Online.
Yep.
Thanks. So we've got a couple. Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, we got a couple online comments that I want to read out for the room. So Stephanie says it would be great if you could follow up with the case studies in the cookbook. Also, you can disseminate via the RDA newsletter, for example, and e-research or similar conferences. And then Marta posted that perhaps via the RDA organizational assembly, case studies and outputs are periodically presented to the organizational assembly. I think these are very important stakeholders, immediate users of your work.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Shannon.
There was a question.
So basically, I had a similar comment, like follow up on the case studies of the cookbook in case they've been adopted by other institutions. What's the success? What's the challenges? That would make an interesting second edition of the book.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I just wrote it in the notes, but I'm not quite sure where to put it. What about the various training programs like data carpentries or the CoData RDA training program? It's a neat place to maybe get not co-host, but interviewees for the program, as well as to promote the podcast as a way to hear conversations about how people are doing this work. And so, for example, the FASIP DataWorks program has an annual award that they give to folks that are doing really awesome work in this space. And so there could be an opportunity there to partner with them and highlight some of the folks who have won that award. And MIT does too. So just some thoughts about how to get it out there and get a broader audience than just the folks in this room.
Thank you.
We've got an online question. Do you have a small communication toolkit for the toolkit and podcasts that we can get into our organizational newsletters, for example? I mean, I guess I can answer that. We do not. So that, I mean, that could be an interesting other output for this group, some sort of communication toolkit for RDM stuff.
Yeah.
That's vague, but.
Was the question, do we have a communication toolkit for RDM or for our
For the
products?
cookbook.
Because I think that would be a good thing to provide.
Oh,
as well.
basically, yeah, basically some boilerplate text and an image or two. And that's also from Stephanie following up. So yes, I don't know if you can see it, but there's enthusiastic nodding from some of the co-chairs.
Easily shared little short thing that has core information about it and where to find it, resources and things like that. Yeah, good suggestion. Question at the front here.
It's about the networks. I think you can easily share, but also get input from the LIBER, the League, the association, the League of Research European Libraries.
Okay.
Because they have the RDM management working group. So maybe you know them, or we can liaise.
Fantastic. I'm disconnected from the European sphere at the moment.
Today, this afternoon, I see there's a slot, block 5, a parallel session about national approaches. And I think here you can have complementary networks from non-that English native speakers or easy speakers, data managers like Japan, France, and others.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Oh, Connie.
Thank you, James, and thank you to this group for continuing this excellent work. So one of the things I've seen in the Google form was also like a toolkit to engage lower middle income countries or researchers, and I think that's really important also for the Research Data Alliance as the upcoming strategy is going to focus on globalization. I mean, this might be quite difficult, but have you also considered like multilingual content, or thinking about if you do focus on different regions, that might be something that you might want to consider. And I also want to second Marta's comment as well about engaging with the RDA's organisational assembly and also the regional assembly to both collect case studies, but also to disseminate this work. Because I actually didn't know how far the podcast was along, and I don't think it's actually an RDA output. So that might be something to consider, making it an official output so that it can be presented and shared via the RDA network. So just a consideration. Oh, that's great. And yes, a good point on the linguistic diversity as well. We don't have well, certainly I am not capable of doing other languages. Very stereotypical English speaker here, unfortunately. But yes, it's a fantastic suggestion. And if there are any people who are interested in helping sort of build that capacity or translate any of these tools or resources, then yeah, absolutely, it'd be great to have you on board. You've very nicely bridged to the sort of second question that I just stuck up with the clicker. The form has 3 questions, and the sort of second one is about alignment with the things that are suggested in the group's charter for what the group should be doing. So the next question was, so you can see what those are on the Google Forms, but also just a more general open question. What sort of toolkits, guidelines are most useful for this group to focus on within the broad sphere of how to engage researchers with data management? Where should we be directing our effort? What kinds of case studies should we be focusing on above others? And particularly if we are only taking a smaller subset and diving deeper into them for a second edition of the cookbook versus a sort of lighter look at more of them if we do have an online tool that has sort of less information. So yeah, thoughts on that? Priorities, suggestions for, I'll just stick the other one up as there. Suggestions for other group priorities or projects that we should be focusing on.
Yeah, hi. When I filled out the Google form, I was under the impression that it is focused mainly on, I'd say, soft measures. So have you considered like including hard measures like, you know, policies that require researchers to do data management or mandatory data management plans, or also things like yeah, special funding by the university, saying, okay, if you want to, you know, publish your data, you can apply for additional funds that are provided by the university. We have such a fund. And this is something that I was under the impression doesn't fit into the template. Yeah, are there any plans on including these kind of measures also?
I think that's a fair comment. That yes, it's focused much more on soft things rather than. I think the issue is more one of modularity, in that we wanted to the goal of the cookbook, and in general at the moment our focus on in terms of the case studies is collecting stuff that could be either modularized or explains sort of how to start up something. So with a view to a case study of how to get university leadership on board with applying policies around data management that will then encourage researchers to engage more with it. I think that's in scope. At the moment, issues around how case studies that sort of say, oh yeah, you need to set up a pot of funding that will then do this. That is something we've sort of steered away from so far, because it requires a specific like resource investment more than just having, you know, people in your research data management kind of sphere in your organization. But it is something we could potentially move into as a case study example as well. Any other thoughts on that from co-chairs or from other people in the room?
So maybe also from my perspective. So when we started, the world was a little bit different. So there was not from a high level that much attention on data management. So it was more the question of people who are in data management and who have the need to get engaged with the researchers. So that's why also we are focusing more on the soft side and also how we measure this, because it's more in a bottom-up approach. So having these hard facts or these hard things, it's more a top-down approach. And I think we have to discuss it also, if we should rethink about how we do this. But from my feeling, and that's just a feeling about here in the session now, is I think it's also too important that we don't forget about this bottom-up approach, because I think that's more in long term also. It brings more into the community, and maybe that's got a little bit too less attention now with this top-down thing. So it's just a feeling, but maybe we can reconsider also this.
Well, yeah, the question is what works better.
Yes, that's the main question.
So I've got a question from online, kind of tied back to the cookbook, but asking if we know of the Elixir RDM kit and the Elixir cookbook, and Paulette saying it might be good to see some kind of collaboration or alignment. I personally have never heard of them. Has any of the other co-chairs or anybody else?
Elixir is an infrastructure, a research infrastructure in Europe for life sciences. So it could be a good domain specific case study for us. So we could incorporate it in the revision of the cookbook for sure. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead. And then we've got another question online.
Coming back to being multilingual and also thinking about the hearing impaired persons, would it be an idea to have a transcripts of these podcasts, because they are much easier to search and much easier to translate than just the audio files?
Shannon?
So the question was a transcript. That's a good, so I will say in terms of accessibility, we don't have transcripts. That just wasn't part of the workflow, not for any particular reason, but we'd have to see if there's any free softwares out there that can provide transcripts.
I think this is a good suggestion, and I think it's something we can
Yeah,
I think we can make this
something to look
happen.
into, because I've thought about it, because I know I listen to other podcasts and you can find the transcript for the whole thing below. We just haven't had the manpower to do it manually, but I see a couple hands up, so maybe people know of software. Is that?
Well, if you've already got the Zoom recording, the Zoom
Does
it
the
has-
Zoom do it?
Like it's relatively good. Obviously, you'd have to edit it because you're editing this thing, but you would already probably have that.
Okay.
Alternatively, you can re-put it through once you've recorded it, then put it back through something.
Okay.
That's how we do some of ours. But yeah, YouTube, if you did
YouTube.
it, would also do subtitles. Then they're pretty decent. At
Microsoft
least for
Stream
some
as well.
people's. If it depends obviously also on who you have as guests. Certain people's voices it picks up very well. Other people's voices, it's kind of bad, but it might work for some of your episodes at least.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
We have these first the question in the back and then the front.
I'm changing the subject back again. So if there's more thoughts on that, I'm happy to defer.
I think we're good. Go ahead.
Okay. Just on just to go back to a few comments ago on hard versus soft motivation. When we did our synthesis on this stuff, we categorized them more as extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. And a lot of the cookbook and what we're talking about is trying to build people's intrinsic motivation to engage in this kind of work, and the mandates and so forth, the journal making you do it are the extrinsic mandates. And our initial finding was you have to have the extrinsic motivation to kind of get things started, to see the benefits in the community. But the only way it will last is through the intrinsic motivation. That's the enduring one. That's what creates actually a culture of data sharing in a particular discipline.
Thank you.
So I've got one online, if nobody's got one here. So Marta says, in terms of other priorities, I note that the current case studies have research institutions as the main stakeholders. I wonder if there would be enough interest to think about case studies aimed at other stakeholder groups as well, e.g. research infrastructures, funders, publishers. They are also important stakeholders in the research ecosystem and could play a role in engaging researchers with data / rewarding such engagement.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, and absolutely we have been focused more on institutions, and increasingly, yes, we could spread the net wider. I think there's some scope for even broader than that. I don't know, anyone who was in the Indigenous data session earlier, one of the issues around that area is very much capacity building in Indigenous groups to ensure they've got the knowledge to engage with the data management processes, and I think we could also, groups like that are also stakeholders who have a vested interest in building their engagement with data management practices, so they can understand these care and fair principles and interact with the traditional landscape in a more equal manner. So yeah, absolutely, great suggestion. And yes, we should spread our scope out to more than just traditional academic institutions.
Yeah, and on top of that, just to add to Marta's comment, also communities, just like, the communities, the Turing Way as an example, and other organizations that have got really good ideas for engagement that probably everybody could learn from. Don't know if that helps, but.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments, people filled in the form?
I know we have a couple other questions just in terms of general direction.
Yeah, sure.
Questions for you all, not questions that I have, but just outside of the case study, because, this is just a general also interest group. So we're curious about what you might see as other next steps for the interest group, or what you are hoping to get out of as a member of this interest group. Yeah, those were the other two. So this is kind of more outside of the case studies. If you had any other thoughts about what you would like to see from this group. Apparently we're perfect. Yeah.
I think everyone's ready for lunch, I think.
Well, I would still keep you here. And I would love to see that group being more present and more visible, and also injecting we have to engage researchers into all of the other interest groups, because that's what I often miss is we are developing so many nice tools and try to make it easier, blah, blah, but nobody is really involving the researchers in their developments. At least I don't really see it, how we can communicate that to the researchers and how we can convince them and raise their intrinsic motivation, which is ultimately necessary for sustainable research data management.
I think that's a fair comment, and yeah, this is us attempting to kickstart ourselves into being more active again, and yeah, that's going to be dependent on the engagement we get from the group, and hopefully picking up a few more co-chairs and members and things that can contribute. But absolutely, I agree. There should be someone in most sessions, ideally, asking that question of how we build that link, not just to the people who are already in the room and interested in best practice and making sure they're doing things as they should be, but also to that tier outside who are engaged in research and maybe vaguely aware that these things are happening or that there are policies, but are not one of those people who will ever really come to one of these events.
And maybe that's your all's action item for the rest of the plenary. Be that person in the session that asks, how are you engaging with researchers with this output or with this program? As a first step, but I like that.
Just to continue on that question of the researchers and involvement of researchers, I guess that researchers are very much discipline diversified. So ontologists in social science and ontologists in chemistry or in material science are completely different. So if you would like to get to the researchers, there should be different channels of communication for each group.
Yeah, good comment. One at the back, yeah.
I just had one more idea for like future projects, maybe, because we're always talking about best practices, but also like if I want to engage with researchers, there's a plethora of possibilities, and it's sometimes hard to decide which things not to do, which are the things that just don't work and don't get researchers engaged in research data management. So this could also be something to look at that would be beneficial to people.
So what you're suggesting is the cookbook should have an appendix that is like
the poison book.
Yes, the
anti-cookbook.
The poisoner's handbook of how to really disengage your researchers. I mean, I think that's a great idea. It's always the case. I mean, in any kind of scientific, it's always those negative results that don't get the attention and don't get documented. So yeah, absolutely, completely agree. I think in general, what we tried to do in the original cookbook, and I think the scope for improvement in whatever we do next, in terms of a sort of second edition or a collection of studies online, of having some categorizations in there so people can pick the one that's actually suited to their context. I showed that table earlier of what's in the cookbook, and I think that can be improved for the next thing that we do. But yeah, absolutely, that should also include case studies of cases where there was really very little engagement. Everyone's organized some kind of workshop at some point or been to one where they were where one of 3 people showed up, even though the organizers provided pizza. And it's just always very sad when that happens. And it is good to know the context in which those failures occur, to make sure people spend their resources as wisely as possible. So yeah, fantastic suggestion. Thank you very much. Anything else? All right. Okay. In that case, then I think we will wrap up. So just very.
Oh, wait, someone, sorry, it just came in chat.
Yeah, no, okay.
Someone added the following to the notes. May I suggest providing a light version of the form for those wanting to share small initiatives with less details in addition to whole projects? It means that the output could be made from detailed case studies, but also short presentations. As to give my own example, a specific part of a training could be, could be the matter of a short presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, suggestion of a shorter version of the form versus just the big full case study. Yeah, I would say if the form does not fit what you are trying to submit, then please just leave your name and the title of your case study in the shared collaborative notes. And we can follow up with that with you individually and figure out a way of including that information. I think there's potentially scope for some little sort of short short case studies as well. Yeah, good idea. Right. Closing remarks. So many thanks to everyone for attending and contributing. Those of you who started or have submitted case studies, everyone who's contributed to the notes, asked questions and helped us shape our direction. I haven't seen how many people have filled in the directions form, but I will look at that after the session alongside the other co-chairs. Please share that template and Google Forms link through your networks. If you have, if there are places which you think have good case studies, then please feel free to share those forms and templates to them to try and collect those case studies from there. If you've expressed interest in joining the group as co-chair or contributing a case study, we'll follow up with you after the session based on your information in the collaborative notes. And please contact the co-chairs if you have any other questions or suggestions. And with that, I just want to say, have a fantastic, great rest of International Data Week. And thanks so much for coming.
Before you guys leave, we have a little advertisement / one more very small request from another group. So there is a new interest group called, not Engaging Researchers, Evaluation of Research. It meets tomorrow, I believe, during the second session of the RDA session of the day. They're looking for user studies for how you may use research evaluation. So at the top of the notes, our collaborative notes, I put a link to the form. Basically, it's one sentence saying what role you play, how you would use research evaluation, and why you would do it. So I am a researcher. I'm looking for how people use my data so that I can create a promotion package, that sort of thing. So one, come to our session tomorrow. It would be great to see lots of people there who are interested in evaluation and engaging with researchers. And two, if you can fill out a user study, one sentence, we would really appreciate that.
Thanks, Andrea. And thank you everyone again.
I know, I work remotely, but, and so they don't give me cards.